Researching a story right now which really speaks to a lot of what you're saying, and I think that sort of maybe could be a solution, and that is really managing our culture's expectations of what marriage is supposed to be.
Right.
And you know, the institutions, the religious institutions, certainly helping that and giving you a long-term view versus just visceral and fleeting.
Right.
And the question I have for you is this piece that I'm writing right now and researching, which it turns out to my shock and surprise that the majority of people before they got divorced were frequently still having sex. So that this notion that is certainly buoyed by the media that sex is the panacea, and if you don't have good sex, then you're not in a good relationship, and how do you define that?
Right.
Well, the research now shows people are still having it and still divorcing. So what is it then? No, I mean, because then it is then something else. It's not just that quote attraction or whatever.
Right.
So in light of what you're doing, what and that fact alone, why is it though then if you're whether it's a college educated, but in particular the middle class and what you cited, then why don't they want to stick together even if they are enjoying the companionship of being together and having someone take care of you and you take care of someone else? So I would love you to please comment on that, because I could use it for my story.
Yeah. It's a provocative question, and I guess one of the things that we talk about in the report is this idea of the soulmate model of married life, which of course David Popenoe and Barbara Whitehead had kind of pioneered almost 10 years ago for the National Marriage Project. Is become increasingly popular among many Americans, and it's basically the idea that marriage is primarily about an intense emotional and sexual relationship. It's about just the couple and their experience of happiness and fulfillment as a couple or as persons in that relationship. And of course the problem with that model of marriage is really twofold. One is that it's a lot easier to have an intense soulmate relationship when you have the economics all taken care of. You're not worrying about the rent. You're not worrying about the loss of the job.
I can only imagine.
But the other problem with that, is that romance is not a reliable servant of marriage. That every marriage has its ups and downs, it waxes and wanes. And if you're kind of looking constantly for that intense, personal soulmate relationship, even if you're regularly having sex with your spouse, you may feel like this person really isn't, doing it for you. And of course, the older institutional model of marriage recognized that marriage was certainly about that relationship, but it was also about raising a family together. It was about sharing an economic life together, sharing friends and family members, extended family members together, establishing traditions together. And that institutional model of married life, is certainly, I think, more likely to sustain stable marriages, but it's also more accessible to middle Americans who, may be more likely to be connected to their, to their kin and whatnot, and who may not have the best, social skills at all times and the best incomes, but they can do these other institutional things. And so the rise of the soulmate model of married life has basically allowed the college-educated set to continue to enjoy access to marriage on their own terms now, but it's a less accessible model for people who don't always have great incomes and that strong personal connection and those strong social skills that folks who are college educated tend to have more of, on average. So I think that's part of the answer to your question.
Hollywood then also
well, yeah, the Hollywood thing point, I also wanted to mention that it's not in the report, but I also looked at the GSS data on education and TV watching. And this goes back to Professor Callahan's point. And what I find is that there is, so a big question here is too, if middle Americans are not working as much, and they're not as engaged as much in civil society, what are they doing with their time? And first things.
The publishers in New York might have a different.
Well, we do know actually from this data that they're actually watching more TV. So there's a clear gradient in TV watching by education. So folks who are college educated watch the least TV, and the middle group watches more TV, and those who are high school dropouts watch the most TV. And so I think they're getting their ideas about marriage in part from the popular culture. And so I think the paradox here is that in some ways the college educated set may have more realistic and more institutional understandings of marriage, at least once they get married. Whereas the folks who are in this middle category, I think maybe taking their cues from the media and having kind of a more romantic, a more soulmate model of married life, which of course is not as likely to sustain them over the long term in their marriages. So that's